So today we are chopping this top of the line Giant frame in half and seeing what we find inside.
It's not ideal at all.
Now this is the Giant Propel Advance Pro Zero, which I bought from eBay for £60. Now it is a 2016/2017 model, and it was a top of the line bike for Giant at that period of time. Now although it's getting on for 6 years old, bikes with this frame sell on eBay for around £1,000 still. When it came out, I believe that a complete bike with an Ultegra mechanical group set was around the £3,000 mark. Now there are two very clean and perfectly aligned cuts within the section glued back in on the top tube. Now this is what they do for insurance write-offs. It's done so that the bike can't be resold essentially as a whole after it's been written off by an insurance company. It seems pretty wasteful, I know, but these bikes pop up regularly on eBay and they're all the same with the same cut on the head tube, perfectly aligned. Apart from the direct cut in the top tube, the rest of the frame is looking pretty good, or as good as it can do for a 6-year-old frame. We shall see if it's had a hard life when we cut it up, if there's anything interesting inside. I know people love a good weigh-in, and we can see that this frame is a total of 1,285 grams. It does have the bottom bracket in though, which would be about another 50 grams or so. Now I did try and see how much the Giant Propel 2024 weighs, but they don't give you the weights anymore on the listings on the website. God knows why, I find that pretty odd to be honest. So time to get this frame cut up, and then we will take it to Rob at Carbon Bike Repair for a full in-depth inspection, and he will have a good look over and tell us what he finds.
This was their flagship bike in around 2016. You can see a few things that I can point out to you that have changed since then. You can see here these glue marks, one there that's been cut through, and another one here. Is basically what you're seeing is this bike is made out of 3 parts. So when someone uses the word monocoque, which means one piece, it becomes a monocoque after it's been assembled, but it's actually not molded like that. I know for a fact that the bike industry, knowing carbon and the way carbon binds together under compression, having a glued sections like this is not ideal at all, and that's why those areas at that period of time were warranted. With molds that have taken away this need to have to bond these parts together, these are in most cases not really warrantable, because there's very little defect that can take place once they've molded them, so they don't just fail. But it is interesting to see on this high-end bike kind of what they've done to circumvent some issues. Now here's a very interesting thing. You see this 3,000 toes per bunch, if you like, in a plain weave pattern, and just in this area here, because clearly when these bikes were designed and people had the clamps in, they didn't clamp them enough, and the seat post used to drop down, and the first place it narrowed was down here, and the seat post would burst through the outside. And we've fixed hundreds of these bikes like this. So what they've done here is it's an afterthought, but it's a clever one. They've put that added extra strength into that collision point, and probably saved a few bicycles as a result of slipping down. Again, you don't see much of this. These are aluminium alloy dropouts. I much prefer these. I'm not a fan of carbon dropouts at all, never have been. So these are basically inserted in the same way. They've got these recesses in here to save weight. They lend themselves perfectly for skewing wheels in. They can take the pressure, because this material and alloys is a kind of a crystalline material, which means it flows and it moves, and it can adopt and adjust and take these compressions and abrasion, most importantly, where carbon doesn't. So now they've gone fully carbon on these areas, and we hardly get any work for these dropouts anymore. And I'm not sad to see them go, because they're a nightmare to fix. So that's great. We have problems in other areas like wall thicknesses, but you can see here wall thickness is not alarmingly thick. It's not scaringly thin like the more modern frames, and they got even better with compression, or maybe got rid of more material, or changed the layout of the uniweave in a way that I'm not aware of, which is quite possible. But just on the overview here, you can see again, being a high-end bike, they use a high modulus carbon in this area, and for some reason they've put in some twill weave in there. Twill being carbon that can mold itself to more organic shapes, whereas the plain weave is almost for cylindrical structures. So that's an interesting little fiddle. They've definitely messed. You will see the high-end bikes, they mess with these things. They've got little bits and pieces like a little bit of foam in there, and this thing here, this little piece here of uniweave carbon in this section here. I'm not quite sure why that's there. Another piece in here. Whereas when you see on the cheaper frame, it's just kind of uniweave from this side to that side, and then some plain weave on the structural sections, and that's done. A little bit more thought gone in, a little bit more DNA, a little bit more compliance issues, stiffness in certain places, making the bike a little bit more magical to ride. Let's have a look at the head tube and how that's developed over time. They used to be very, very small head tubes and hugging the steerer. Now they're a lot larger, and some will say, well, that's for the aerodynamics, but not entirely true. If you look at the way that the steerer fits into the head tube, you can see there's quite a lot of space in between there. And one of the reasons is what I said earlier. This area here on the crown race is critical. It's the most dangerous part on any bicycle, because when this goes, all your front weight is on the bike. You have no warning signs. These things go and you hit the deck. There's no question that this is the most dangerous part of the bike. This is the one that we take most seriously when we do inspections, particularly on bicycles that had some front trauma or rear trauma. The way that design is very, very clever. If you put the bearing in this place, you lock this down, right? So this can't go anywhere. It can't twist like that, right? It sits square. And it stops from twisting because it locks it down here with a bearing. So it's kind of a captive space in here. So what they've done is they've tuned this steerer to deal with the level of weight, the average weight allowance that they have for this particular frame, to flex to a certain point where the fork, if you move the camera this way, yep, where the fork on full weight would bend here. It would bend here and would flex just ever so much. And same with when it was going through a pothole or a frontal impact, the tolerance and the stiffness of, so you don't have a wobbly front wheel. It's just using the carbon's characteristics of flexibility in the steerer to allow the fork, which should not flex. The fork must not flex. It's misunderstood. The fork should be stiff and should hold the wheel in position and not allow the wheel to move. It's the steerer that's supposed to move. So it's very important when you have an incident on your bicycle, and this is a point I've raised a few times in various different channels, that if you've had a frontal impact, right, and you heard a crack, and you start looking around at your top tube joint of the head tube and the down tube and the head tube and areas like that when you can't see any cracking, do yourself a favor, climb onto the bike, hold your front brakes down, don't sit on the saddle, lean over the bike, over the front wheel, and rock the bike back and forward. And if this is fractured, and I'll show you one that's fractured in a second, this flexing here, if it's broken here, will make a noise, and the fork will be alarmingly loose. And I'll give you an example quickly. So if you look at this bike, this had a frontal impact. On the high definition screen, you can't see much trauma in this area. And the rider carried on riding and felt there was something wrong with this bike and brought it to us. And we took that out. Yeah? Oh, wow. Now, in the case, my point exactly about where the flex should take place in a steerer is generally the flexing takes place at two places. Right down by the crown race here, because that's the cantilever point for the length of the fork, and the middle of the steerer, which sits in between the two bearings, which takes the brunt of the impact.
Destroyed.
Yeah.
But he rode it. You could still ride it, but
he just about got there. I mean, if it collapsed, it would have collapsed into the head tube and sat there. Yeah. But if it breaks here on this edge, it comes away. There's nothing to hold it. At least this can lean up against the front and you'll kind of, especially if you apply the brakes. Imagine you apply the brakes. You've got a lot of pressure on that wheel. The rubber's touching down on the tarmac. There's a lot of grip there. So on this side, you can see the same material there. You can see here we've got 1K carbon on the side, which is obviously something they put on beforehand and then laid on this what looks like a stainless steel stopper, so it stops the seat post from coming any further south. Again, this is an afterthought, probably wasn't designed in, because if this was designed in, they would probably have a recess within the carbon itself. Definitely something we don't often see.
A big thanks to Rob from Carbon Bike Repair for filming and sharing his knowledge. For more information from Rob, you can watch this video next, where he talks about all things carbon. Lots more insight and lots more information. So I'll see you in the next one.